Hi, I'm Keon, a research analyst with Lipper, and I'm here to speak to you about fund flows for the week ended Wednesday, September 10th. Let's take a quick look at the market activity for the week. After 4 straight weeks of gains, the U.S. broad market indices both experienced slight losses last week. The Dow Jones Industrial Average was off 10 points, and the S&P 500 index was down 5 points. In news impacting the markets, much of it was unchanged from the previous weeks. We have continued geopolitical concerns about Russia and ISIS, as well as fears that the Fed may raise interest rates sooner than anticipated. A new item that caught the market's attention was Apple unveiling its new product line, which included the iPhone 6, the Apple Watch, as well as a mobile payment system. Shares for Apple appreciated 3% on the day of the announcement. Let's turn our attention back to fund flows now. Overall for the week, including both conventional mutual funds and ETFs, we saw positive net inflows of $7.4 billion. Let's take a closer look at our macro groups now. Money market funds led the way here with net inflows of $5.3 billion. This marks the 5th week out of 6 where they've had positive flows. Following up money markets was taxable bond mutual funds, which had positive flows of $1.3 billion, their 5th straight week of inflows. Muni funds contributed $403 million in inflows, also their 5th straight week, while equity funds had net inflows of $105 million. Let's take a closer look at equity mutual funds now. The $105 million, as stated previously, they had net inflows of $105 million. Taking a closer look at the data, we see a continuation of the recent trend where money is flowing into non-domestic equity funds and flowing out of domestic equity funds. Non-domestic took in $700 million last week, while domestic had $600 million in outflows. Overall, for the year to date, both have positive net inflows, but non-domestic is outgaining domestic $70 billion to $20 billion. Let's move on to the ETF side of equities now. For the week, equity ETFs took in $877 million. It's their 5th straight week of inflows. And ETFs, we're seeing the same picture that we saw in the mutual funds, that money is flowing into the non-domestic and out of domestic. Leading the way for inflows was the iShares MSCI EMU ETF, which took in $263 million, as well as the iShares MSCI Brazil capped took in $233 million. ETF investors were selling 2 S&P 500 products last week. The Spider S&P 500 ETF had net outflows of $530 million, while the iShares Core S&P 500 ETF had outflows of $420 million. Let's take a look at the fixed income side of things now. Taxable bond mutual funds had net inflows of $1.3 billion for the week. Funds in Lipper's investment-grade debt classifications paced the net inflows as they took in $700 million. The outflows, high yield funds had $319 million leave their coffers. It's been a tough summer for high yield funds. So far, since the start of July, they've had about $9 billion leave, which was the week of August 6th was the pinnacle here, where they had almost $6 billion leave their coffers. For the year to date, the high yield group is down about $11 billion. Let's take a look at taxable ETFs now. Taxable bond ETFs. They had net outflows of $700 million last week. Again, a similar story where we saw high yield pacing the outflows. The iShares iBox high yield corporate bond ETF led the way with $480 million in outflows. Let's move on to our Muni group now. Muni bond funds had net inflows of just over $400 million last week. Again, national munis were the main contributor here. They had $519 million in net inflows last week, and this pushes their year-to-date net inflows to $15.5 billion. Moving on to our last group now, money market funds. The group had $5.3 billion in net inflows last week. This was led by taxable money markets, which had net inflows of $6.1 billion, which was a reversal of the previous week's performance for the taxable group, when they had $9.1 billion in net outflows. Well, that wraps up this week's report. Please join us here again next week when another analyst will provide insight into the week's fund flow activity. Until that time, please join us at our website to get more information about fund flows at www.lipperusfundflows.com.